Welcome to Political Review with Ray Hanania and myself, Frank Calbrese. It's Monday, August 24th, 2026. I'm a political analyst, and Ray Hanania is a former City Hall reporter and columnist at Hanania.com. This podcast focuses on politics, on specific developments, issues, and controversies in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, and we broadcast when issues arise each week or every day. Published at political-review.com and on YouTube. Check us out and subscribe. In this episode, we're going to look at the opening. Today's the first day of school, so we're going to look at opening day of schools and the challenges facing the Chicago Public Schools budget and the upcoming Chicago board elections, which is going to be the first election the whole board's elected. So what's going on, Ray, with school spending?
Yeah, I mean, it is the first day of school, right? So we wanted to kind of look at that. And I went. Did you go to the public schools?
I had a weird childhood. I went to a boarding school in Wisconsin,
All
right?
right, you probably got a better education, Frank. So don't feel too bad, even if it was a boarding school. So I went to the Chicago public schools, and it was the worst experience of my life. I barely was getting a D average. It wasn't until I got out into the suburbs, then went into the military, and my mind finally opened up. The further I got away from the Chicago public schools, the better. I lived on the southeast side.
Mhm.
So it doesn't surprise me that when we talk about public schools, math is a big problem, not just for the students, but for the union, for the mayor, for all the board people. Because, I was telling you earlier that I did some mathematical analysis of the schools. There are
Tell me,
316,224
tell me.
students, right, that are returning to school today on the
Right.
first day of school. There are 522 campuses and schools. The total budget for the Chicago Public School is $10.1 billion, which means that with 316,000 students, the school district is basically spending $31,623 per student. And at 316,000 students, by the way, when I covered City Hall, there were 450,000 students. So they've lost a lot, almost a third of all their students over the last 30 years. It continues to drop. 30% of the schools and the campuses are nearly half empty. And there are about 50 of the schools, high schools and elementary schools, that have less than 200 students. And I think one, right? Frederick Douglass Academy High School
Yeah, on the west side, right?
on the west side
In
on
Austin.
I think it's yeah in Austin on North
Mhm.
Whaler Avenue. It has like I don't know what 20 students or 22 students. They're spending over $68,000 a
And,
student.
and and if you look it up, Douglas School, it's not like some small building. It's a full school. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like a city block or whatever, and there's only 20 students there.
and
It's really crazy.
you know what's fascinating about this, Frank? If I want to know how much money is being spent, I can get it. If I want to know how many students there are, I can get it. If I want to know how many administrators and principals there are at any school, I can't get that. You
Oh, wow.
cannot get the breakdown of how many administrators there are, how much money they're being paid. And that tells me there's a problem. Everything is easy to get except how much money are they wasting? And I love teachers and I think teachers deserve pay raises and salaries, but I think the problem is administrators and principals. And that's why they're keeping these schools open to protect those jobs, which are run by the Chicago Teachers Union.
So Ray, the numbers are before the pandemic, 2019, there were 37,000 employees and 260,000 students. Now there's 46,000 employees and, as you said, 319,000 students. So while since 2019, the student population's gone down about 13%, 45,000, while the employment has gone up almost 25%. and they added 9,000 new jobs.
And
it just doesn't make any sense. Um, usually, if you ran a business, Ray, and if you had, 1,000 customers a month, but I don't know, maybe you're selling CDs or DVDs and it's not going so well. Now you have 50 customers a month. You wouldn't hire more people, so
no,
it's just
no. And if
um
I had an office that was empty and I had 20 or 50 administrators there, each making over their salaries average about 160,000 a year.
I mean, just think about the cost to open up. Like we're talking about Douglas School on the West Side. There's like 30 students or something like that. Just think about the operating costs of keeping that open,
Right.
right? For the 20 students, you just can't have
That
one teacher there. You
right.
have to have an administrative system. You have to have, you have to have operations, right? You have to have a janitorial staff. You have to, you probably have to have 15 full-time employees to support
At least
25 students, right?
knowing the schools,
Right.
it's not, you maybe need a minimum to do that. They
Mhm.
probably have 45 or 50 at the school. And you're talking about a lot of money. So let me, well, you're feeling Frank, and I'll tell you my feeling, which I think is obvious, but do you think that, what are they protecting here?
Well, I think it's really obvious that the teachers union has been really, protecting teachers' salaries, teachers' positions. They have a moratorium,
Well, they
Rahm
don't
Emanuel.
see, you said teachers, but let me just correct you. Are they really protecting teacher positions and teacher salaries, or are they protecting the administrators and the administrative salaries that oversee the teachers?
So
Because
there has
they're
been
teachers, but
some fighting this year between the Service Employee Union, which SEIU, and
right.
CTU, the teachers
Yes.
union, because they did make some cuts, but they just didn't cut really teachers. They cut um, the Service Employees Union members, which are, custodial staff,
Right.
bus aides, stuff like that.
And that's the
The service.
lower level income too, and the school
Correct.
system.
Exactly. So instead of reducing the number of teachers, which, as you know, Ray, that's a six-figure job in the city of Chicago,
Right.
they're reducing service employees, which make, significantly less than a teacher. And that's one of the reasons why, SCIE, you might have heard, they're actually running a candidate against CTU.
Right.
As long as I followed SCIE and CTU, they were tied at the hip, but now they're
For a
going
long
against each
time. Oh
other.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for a long time they were close, right?
Mhm.
Didn't they both support Brandon Johnson
Yes.
4 years ago, right?
So from the data I have is that SEIU spent almost twice as much as CTU. SEIU
Wow.
spent almost $4.5 million supporting Brandon Johnson. CTU spent around 2 million. So SEIU as they're like they like to use the term progressive, right? So these are the progressive
Right.
union,
Right.
SEIU, CTU, like the trade unions, like the plumbers and the carpenters, they don't tend to be involved in progressive politics and liberal politics as much. They're more concerned about just getting jobs for their members. But SEIU and CTU historically, they've been tied at the hip, fighting, kind of on progressive causes for liberal candidates, and now they're against each other in the school board election.
Yeah, this is the thing that bothers me. An overriding principle. I'm a big union person.
Mhm.
I was a member of the union at the Sun Times. I was a member of the union after I left. I support the union. What I don't like though is, and because I think this checks and balance is lost, is when the unions control government.
Right.
When a union
Well,
runs,
welcome to Illinois, Ray.
well, listen, at one point, I got to tell you that, when I got into journalism, it was the unions lobbying government, supporting government, and all they expected was a candidate to say, I'll support that plan.
Mhm.
Now you got to be more than that. You have to be a union member a lot of times. They'll slate somebody who's more loyal to the union than they are to the issue of the office that they're running for. So
Right.
Brandon
Well,
Johnson, he was a CTU candidate, right?
well,
He
he
was a
worked for
CTU,
CTU.
right?
He's one of their government relations guy. He was kind
That's
of the
like
lobbyist for
that's
CTU.
crossing the line though, isn't it? Where the
Well, Ray, when you started covering, I think in the 90s, Illinois was not a one-party
The
state,
70s, the
in the
70s.
wow, I didn't know
I
you
wonder if
lived a
that
lot younger.
that's a good point though, that you're right, it wasn't a one-party
You
state
had
and
Republican governors, you know what I mean? You had
right.
you had a Republican speaker in the 90s for I think one or
Yes.
two terms.
Yes. I remember.
And and the Republicans, that they weren't in the majority most this time, but they weren't a super minority
There was
either.
a checks and balance.
Right.
There was
And
a
and so
checks and
now
balance.
it's a one-party state, and the real
Driven
division is if you're a moderate Democrat or if you're just kind of an all-in progressive Democrat. And that's the real divide. And the teachers union, they have like their supporters within the legislature, and then you have like a lot of these moderates from like the suburbs that are kind of pushing back against it.
So
So,
now we're seeing a political division, you're saying, between the unions.
oh
It,
yeah.
it used to be the unions would lobby the elected officials. Now we got the unions controlling Chicago and they're fighting over Chicago. And
So
you have a moderate side and a more traditional, I guess would be the opposite word, in the unions. But I think, isn't that, to me, that's the problem today.
So, Ray, that kind of brings me up something I kind of want to go over real quick is
Sure.
that the CTU, as you know, they've been running candidates, for school board, but now SEIU, which again was historically another progressive union, the Service Employees Union, they're running candidates against CTU. And so you have the school board president election,
Right.
Hilario Dominguez. This might not surprise you, but he basically replaced Brandon Johnson. So he has Brandon Johnson's job at CTU. He is the government relations guy, and he's running for school board president. Obviously, CTU endorsed him, because he works for CTU. And then you have Jessica Biggs, who's supported by the Service Employees Union, and it's going to be a really interesting race. And so those are kind of perceived as the front runners. You also have Jennifer Custer. She's supported by a lot more of the trade unions. Her husband, who's a friend of mine, is used to work in the trade unions. And then you have Victor Henderson. I don't know if you know Victor, but
No,
he's a trial attorney, Southside guy.
I've heard of him, but I
He
don't know.
and so that's kind of the race. And then you have another guy in there, but it's going to be an interesting race. So you have kind of CTU versus SEIU against each other in the first. I don't remember them ever being opposed to each other before.
But you see the change, right? It used to be
Mhm.
Republicans and Democrats. Then it used to be political right and left. Now it's unions on each side of the fight.
Right.
And unions are making the decisions.
Mhm.
And unions have one agenda. They want money. That's why you have a union.
From the taxpayer.
Yes, and their whole, and again, I've supported unions all my life. I paid into union dues, but it just seems like we've changed the system, handed over the system to the unions, who do have one agenda. They may fight about who that person's going to be, but the one thing they will agree on is the salary level and the benefits. It always has to be more. And that's why Rahm Emanuel, one of his biggest problems was fighting with the unions when he wanted to close all these empty schools, right? And it was just impossible. You just
Yeah,
couldn't do it. And
he
they should
famously
do it,
closed 50 schools. Right.
but they should do it.
Right. And so Rahm Emanuel, the calculation was instead of closing, 10, 15 schools a year and people
Y-
complain,
Right.
he was just going to do one big one,
Good.
a big one. Just he closed 50 schools at once. And then obviously CTU didn't like that because a
Why
lot
didn't
of
they like it
teachers,
though? Say why they didn't like it. Let's be
because
honest.
a lot of teachers lost their jobs.
Not just teachers, administrators, right?
Right.
Teachers lose their job. Listen, when you go from 450,000 students to 300,000 students, don't you think you're going to lose teachers? There's going to be a less need for teachers. If we had, and the way this system is working, if we have 20 students left, we will still have 1,100 teachers and administrators running the school system. That seems to be the priority. Now, that
Well,
seems really wild, right?
Ray, it's actually worse than what you're saying because the student population's gone down 10%,
Yes,
while the employment has gone up 10 or 25%.
right.
So if we have 20 students in the whole system, that means we would have
And
200,000 employees.
I think
at
the
that rate.
taxpayers need to form a union. I think the
Right.
taxpayers need a union, and we need to fight with the unions, the traditional unions, to negotiate wages. The other part of this whole thing, and we've talked about it before, 5 years ago, um, the proficiency level was only 26% of the students met the basic proficiency level. Then they hired a lot of people over the last 5 years, administrators and teachers. But instead of raising the proficiency level, they lowered the level artificially so that they said, oh, 43, 26% only make it. All right, let's lower the level. So now it's 43% that have met the proficiency level. 43% is still bad, but it's double what it was because they lowered it and almost it was significant. It was a significant drop. What I guess what really shocks me is how nobody cares about the quality of education. Nobody cares about the efficiency of the schools. Nobody seems to care about the work product of the schools. This is about jobs and preserving jobs. And I think it's at the expense of the students. How come we don't get politicians and elected officials to talk about that?
Well, as you know, they have they have an elected school system now, which is brand new. That might improve it, but who knows? The mayor used to appoint the school
Right.
board members, and then Lori Lightfoot kind of lost that. She wasn't a very influential
No.
mayor in terms of Springfield and clout, and so the teachers union kind of used that
Yes.
weakness of Lori Lightfoot to pass an elected school board. They're under the impression that they're going to control the school board. I'm under the impression that this is going to go against CTU and that you're going to have more anti-CTU candidate. You're going to have more anti-CTU board members than
Who are still
pro-CTU.
but who are still probably backed by other unions.
Right, by SEIU.
Yeah, and listen, that's a distraction
Mhm.
because it looks like the CTU, yeah, they're going to lose power, but it's still a union power base.
So,
I
so
I think we should go back to City Hall and the mayor controlling the Chicago public schools. I think they should take it away from the unions, and I think that they should eliminate the school board and go back to the mayor appointing and the city council appointing people to the school board. And I'll tell you why, even though it's under the guise of an election, it's a union run election. It's union candidates, and the union's going to decide who wins. And I really think, unfortunately, that's bad for the school system. That's already so bad, it's pathetic. When you look at the numbers, you got to be ashamed of what's happening in our schools. But there doesn't seem to be any shame.
Ray, actually, I looked up the numbers really quick. So eighth grade math proficiency, you were right. It was about 24% in 2019. Now it's only 18%.
It's gotten worse. They
So, so,
lowered.
so, so this is the state standardized exam.
Right.
Now,
Now
you
remember
probably
that I gave you the average. There were
right.
certain areas that are going to do better or worse. And that one even
This
makes
is
me feel worse.
eighth grade, yeah.
That makes me feel bad.
And as you know, Ray, but this is not just a Chicago problem. You probably know, like
Yes.
during COVID, people started, they had
Homeschooling.
they had school at home, right?
Yes.
Work
Yeah.
from home, school from home, and the evidence all showed that students didn't really learn. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They were playing video games instead of really going to school. And so yeah, so that's kind of a national wide thing. But yeah, but math has gone down where the reading has gone up a little bit.
Listen, our podcast, political-review.com, should be taught in the public schools because they might learn something about what's wrong with the public schools. These kids are going through a system that doesn't
Ray,
teach
what
them
schools did you
anything.
go to?
I
What?
went to Hoyne Elementary School at 89th and Crandon. And then I went to, and then they drew the
Is
line
that
in front
South
of
Chicago?
Southeast Chicago near
Yeah.
Pill Hill. And then they drew the line in front of my house. The school was a half a block away from me.
Hmm.
They drew new districts, and I had to walk 8 blocks to go to Warren Elementary School at 90th and Jeffrey. And then I went to Bowen High School. And of course, that was in the middle of white flight in 1968 and 69. And overnight, within 6 months, all the white families in that area just moved out. They literally, 95% of the white homeowners in 6 months sold their homes because a realtor said, the black people are coming and you better get out of here or you're going to lose all your money. Because, we invested in homes,
Was that Pill Hill or like?
Pill Hill and adjacent to Pill Hill.
Hmm.
And we moved. I went to Bogan High School. We bought a home on Tallman, 2 blocks away from Bogan. I got there. As soon as I got there, the principal came, the deputy principal, Mr. Avers was the guy's name, came into my room in the English class, actually, grabbed me by the shoulder and took me to his office and said, you're black. You need to leave. We're going to put you at Calumet. And I said,
Did did
what?
did, did you have a different skin tone back
No,
then, or?
I'm olive skinned, but I'm telling you, I was the darkest kid at Bogan High School
Oh
in
wow.
1969. I said, "Hey, why are you kicking me out of school? I just was part of White Flight. We just bought a home. My parents had to sell the home at a loss. My mother is from Bethlehem. She went to the Catholic Archdiocese, got an exemption because her cousin is pastor at the Church of the Nativity, and
Mhm.
they put me at Little Flower High School until they could buy a new home in Burbank, which was a lot cheaper because they lost a lot of money. And I went to Revis, where it was so country like that a dark person like me was not the major issue out there in Burbank. So I graduated from Revis. But once I got out, that was my sophomore year in high school, my education improved. And
That's
I
good.
gotta be
Was
honest.
it in the military? Is that where you
Well,
learned stuff?
I went to Northern for 2 years where I did
Mhm.
okay, then went into the military, served during the Vietnam War 2.5 years. The war then ended. My number, I think, was 30 or 31. And when I came back out, I went to Circle Campus, and Professor Milton Rakoff adopted me as a student, and I did special studies under him. And then he convinced me to don't focus on the Middle East, focus on Chicago politics, and that's what I did.
That's
And
good.
then I did much better. Although my English stinks, I have to have a good copy editor sometimes. But that's all I blame it on the school system. But Chicago, and you're lucky you didn't go to the Chicago public schools. People say, "Oh, how could you say that about the public schools?" And I have to say it because we're afraid to say it. We don't want to say the truth. The schools in Chicago suck. They're terrible. But nobody wants to admit
Well,
that.
Ray, I think Chicago public schools are interesting because obviously there's a lot of neighborhood schools that are, not so great,
Right.
but then some of the best public schools in the country are in Chicago.
Some of them, oh, absolutely. If you got
But
money,
they're selective enrollment. Um,
and if you have
like so you have
money and
Walter Payton,
right.
you have Northside Prep, and then you have Whitney Young.
Yes,
I think those are some of the best in the country.
you and I never would have gotten into some of the best in the country of those schools. I never would have gotten into a school like that. There were some privileged kids and families in wealthy areas where the parents really had the money and time. They educated their kids outside of the school system and put them in the school system to get the education, the graduation degree.
Mhm.
That explains those schools. That's really what happened. The parents were wealthy and educated enough to ensure that their kids weren't going to be stupefied at a Chicago public school.
So I'm looking. I looked this up real quick. So Northside College Prep. It's the 30th best school in the whole country, and that includes probably like Philip Exeter and Andover, all those
Right.
fancy East Coast schools. And it's the number one in the state. And then Walter Payton's number two in the state, 54 in the country. And then I forgot this one, Lane Tech. That's number three in the state and 80th in the country. And
Bowen
they're
High
actually, this
School,
is kind of surprised me. They're ranked better than IMSA. IMSA,
yeah,
Illinois Math and
yes,
Science Academy,
yes.
is number four in the state and 88th in the country.
Bowen High
So,
School was a great school. I mean, Pill Hill was one of the wealthiest communities, and all the students there went to Bowen High School. And I really do
Mhm.
believe that money is not because the school teaches the kids to be smart. I really do believe the wealthier parents are able to convey a better education on their kids who are in a bad school system. And you could probably name 30 schools that are probably the best in the country in Chicago out of 1,100. That is pretty, in my opinion, that's like, uh, they want to say that they're spending more money on those schools, but I don't really think that's the case. I think it's the parents of these kids that have the money spending it on their own kids, because there are too many schools where the kids are just doing terrible
Mhm.
and they don't have a future. And I feel bad that nobody wants to approach the real problem of what's happening in Chicago. It's just getting worse. Do you think it's getting better or worse, or I guess it depends on what the issues are that we're willing to acknowledge.
Right. Well, so obviously that the selective schools are doing well, and then the neighborhood schools are kind of struggling. So, but obviously those neighborhood schools, a lot of them are in rough areas.
Yeah, I mean
And,
that has an impact.
that's just kind of like it's just not unique to Chicago. If you're a high school in a poor area, like, your test scores just don't tend to be good. So,
Right. And that has
um,
to do with the family life,
correct.
the struggle of the family. They have to work harder to earn money and provide alternatives for the kids. I mean, I get all that. But with all the money that we are pouring into the schools, it's not going to the kids. It's
Right. As you
going to the
said, it was like
structure.
$30,000 or something plus per student.
31,000.
30, yeah, that's a lot of money.
31,623.
That's a lot of money.
That's when you divide that, $10 billion dollars.
Hmm.
That's how much money is allocated per student. But only 16,000, I think, or 18,000 is actually, and that includes that 18,000 per student, includes the cost of the teacher. So in reality, the bulk of that money, that 31,000 per student, I'm going to guess that 25,000 is going for administration, environment, and maybe 5,000 is actually going into a direct benefit to the student. That to me tells me exactly what's wrong with the schools. I would never
Right.
send my kids. They all graduated from suburban schools, and they've done really well. And maybe because it's suburbanites have a smaller district and fewer schools, we could focus on the school. I don't think any community where I lived would tolerate saying, hey, our kids are doing bad. Why don't we lower the level of acceptable? Like the passing grade was 70. That would
Mhm.
be like saying, well, let's make a passing grade 30,
Right. But
30%.
that's a nationwide thing. You probably hear at Ivy League schools, like
It
all the
is.
students get A's and,
It does. It
because,
happens. But,
like when you were in school, a C probably meant average, but now
it
like a
was a
B
70.
plus is average. There's a
Listen,
big grade inflation.
70% was passing when I was a kid. I got 72, an average 72. I was barely a D plus student, in public schools in Chicago until I got out of the public schools and I went into the suburbs, and I really completely changed.
Mhm.
Frank, there were a couple other issues too that you wanted to mention, right? Tell us a little bit about the 13th ward, the
Right.
change
So the
over there.
13th Ward, as you know, was kind of ruled as a kingdom by
Mike
Michael J.
Madigan,
Madigan
right?
for decades, right? I mean, he came into power in was it the 60s or 70s
The
or
committeeman, yeah, in the early 70s.
and his was his father the committeeman or something
I
like
knew
that?
I, you know, I'd have to look back at the books, but I know that the Burkes and the Madigans were rivals way back when. By the time I got to City Hall, they were the representatives. But I had heard about this fight that their parents, and their organizations had for power.
Right. And yeah, so there's as you know, Madigan, he's now an inmate in
Yeah,
West Virginia of courtesy of the federal government. So But a few years ago, he kind of transitioned his power to Marty Quinn,
Right.
who is one of his loyal political
And he was a good
allies.
alderman. Marty was a good alderman, I
Oh yeah,
think.
everyone
Yeah.
likes Marty. He was nicknamed the General because he kind
Yes.
of ran
He
his
did a good
political
job.
operation for a
He did a
while.
good job there, but he
Very
just
good job.
retired, right? And he
Right.
was what?
He's 51 years old, so he's still young, but he wants to get out of politics. Doesn't want to be an alderman anymore.
Yep.
Kind of interesting. He's the only alderman out of 50 who has announced he's not running for re-election. So 49 out of 50 aldermen are running for re-election, with the exception of Marty Quinn. And Marty Quinn, he endorsed not someone from like the traditional Madigan organization, but he endorsed Al.
Cacciolio.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Cacciolio,
From
who worked for Silvana Tabares
Silvana Tabares.
in the
Yeah.
neighboring ward. And,
She
Marty
used to be
Quinn,
a journalist. I knew her. And she actually was a pretty good
was she on
elected
a
official.
radio? I heard she
I,
was a radio.
I think she was a journalist, but I didn't she go down to Springfield at one point and then came back and
Yeah, she was
became
a
an
state
alderman.
rep. Right.
I really like her. I thought she was great. I still like her. The Madigan problems, I think, kind of shifted the ground there. You had to run. I'm still a big Madigan supporter, and
Mhm.
I hope his Supreme Court appeal
You should,
goes through.
do you
I
write him letters? Do you write him letters, Ray, or
Yes, I do actually. I
really?
do.
That's good.
Listen, the guy's one of the smartest guys in the state. He did a great job. And when you are at the top of the hill for 50 years, the longest serving Speaker of the House, minus a few years when the Republicans took over, he did a lot of good things. He ran the place. I didn't always agree with him, but there was a respect for what he was doing.
Yes.
And I think Chicago was in a much better situation back then. So I don't
Yeah, I
know.
mean, it helped to have the person that controlled state government live in Chicago.
Yes, it did.
Um, so right now, Don Harmon and Chris Welsh, that the president of the Senate and the
Suburbanites,
Speaker of the House, they're from near Chicago, but they don't live
right?
in Chicago.
And they're
Um,
already consumed with controversy.
mhm.
Some of the really kind of ridiculous things that they shouldn't be involved in those problems that they have. Well, there was one other issue too that you had mentioned. What was that? What was it that
Well, we have
schools?
upcoming school board Oh, there's a poll that came out on
Yes.
the school board race.
Go ahead.
And yeah, so the poll, I might have touched on it briefly, but it has Jessica Biggs at 11%
That's what it
and
was. Right.
Hilario Dominguez at 10%. Again, Hilario Dominguez, he's the political director for CTU. He's running for Chicago School Board President. Jessica Biggs, she's a school board member. She actually, I live in her district. She represents like the downtown area in Bronzeville, and she is at 11%. She's supported by SEIU, and so yeah, so it's going to be it's a big in Chicago, we have election in November, but this is really the only like competitive election in Chicago. So people should really look at the school board election coming up.
All right, Frank. Listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. You had a very educated approach to the topic today. Oh, yeah, that's right. You're not from the Chicago public school system, so we'll give you
I've
credit
been
for that.
living here since 2013 though,
Did
so
you
I
notice your education level is dropping a little bit just hanging around here in the Chicago area? The best way for people to find you is to go to frankcalabrese.com and me at hanania.com. All right, Frank, thank you. All right,
thank you, Ray.
all right, we'll talk later. Bye-bye, buddy.